Yeah, hello. African Parks is a charity that was created around 2000, and the goal is supposedly to protect nature. That's what they said, but we have seen in the park, the Ojala-Kokwa National Park in Congo, is a true militarization of conservation. So on one side, indigenous peoples are being evicted by armed rangers, and on the other side, African parks treat Baka land as a kind of business. So there is a tourism, there are 3 lodges for tourists inside the park. So wealthy tourists that can pay $10,000 for a 4-day journey, safari, can access the park with indigenous Baka, who are hunter-gatherers, who are the least responsible for environmental destruction, are being evicted from their own lands. This is the kind of model of conservation that African Parks is actually imposing. But it's not only African Parks, it's a typical conservation project, as many others in Africa, unfortunately.
That is interesting. So how many Indigenous people were still living there, and what claims, some of these allegations that you have found, tell us a little bit about what you've discovered.
We don't have a precise figure of how many people, indigenous people, that are living there. We know that around 10,000 people live around the park, that include indigenous and non-indigenous. They're hunter-gatherers, so they move around. It's difficult to count. Being hunter-gatherers means that they depend directly on the forest. So when the park was created, it was created in colonial times, and the people were evicted. And when African Parks arrived around 2010, local people told us that there was an increase in violence. So that means that every time they will enter the forest to collect medicinal plants, hunt to feed their families, or collect vegetables, they will be beaten and abused by the park rangers. So on one side, we have a kind of physical violence that goes from rape to torture and killing of people. On the other side, as I said, being evicted from the forest means the Baka cannot eat. So there is starvation, malnutrition, and health problems.
So when was the first time that you discovered this was going on, and did you bring it to the charity's attention?
It was around 2013. So Survival has been working in the Congo Basin for at least 35 years. But we have first talked to the park manager in Ojala in 2013. Then we raised again the abuses happening in 2014. We published a report in 2017 about African parks and also other charities, conservation charities abuses like WWF. And then finally, we brought to Prince Harry in 2023, and we engaged with the CEO of African Parks in 2023, so last year. But we have been reporting on these abuses and raising these issues of the eviction and the human rights violations since at least 11 years.
So they can't pretend not to have known about it. Prince Harry was president for much of this time. How much responsibility do you think does he bear?
Well, we haven't contacted Prince Harry since until May 2023, so we cannot claim he was aware of these abuses. When we told him about it in the letter, he replied raising concerns and putting us in touch with the CEO of African Parks. So we cannot claim that he knew. What we can say is that a public face of this charity, now that he knows, he has the responsibility to do something about it. And what we want from him is actually that he steps down, because we think that giving his face to this charity is in a certain way beneficial for African Parks, what we know what is happening on the ground. And as I said, because this is not just about, it's not about Harry, it's not about African Parks, this is about the model of conservation that since colonial times has been going on in Africa and also in many parts of Asia. And it's based on the idea that only excluding the local people we can save or the wonderful biodiversity that this continent has. We know for sure that that's not true. We know for sure that indigenous peoples are the best guardians of the natural world. And we want that Prince Harry take a stand on this and put an end, at least at the abuses that the charity he's now on board, in the board, are complicit in, but also as a kind of influencer for social justice issues, we want that he take a stand against fortress conservation.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you make. I mean, does the model of these kind of parks have to be looked at? It's true that they do conserve them, and in many ways they flourish, But if it's at the expense of Indigenous people and not allowing people to live their normal lives, should the government not look into these kind of models?
Yes, well, of course, this model of conservation is not funded by the Congolese government. Much more of the money that goes to conservation, it comes from the global north. So it's the United States, it's the EU, it's Germany especially. And it's these countries that are giving money then to the charities like WWF of African Park to run projects in Africa. So I think the responsibility is much more on us. And that's why Survival has been saying to the funders of conservation, we are the ones who have to change. We are the ones who have the responsibility for this. This model has been invented by us, as I said, comes from colonial times, and now it has been reproduced by big NGOs and the big charities. And we know for sure that it's not working. It's not true that they are protecting anything. We know 80% of biodiversity is on indigenous land. We have a model that is working out there, and this model is when indigenous peoples have the right to recognize biodiversity is protected. So why our money is not going to support that?
Yeah, really interesting to talk to you, Fiore. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for inviting us.